One of the most expansive systems in Starfield is the shipbuilding and ship customization systems, and with how expansive these two systems are, it begs the question, how big can you make your ships? Now there's actually been quite a lot of Reddit posts trying to extrapolate how big you could make your ships based off things like concept art, based off comparing the size of ships to other objects shown in gameplay, and then based off of the sizes we can see ships being in the ship builder system. One of the posts even going as far as theorizing that one of the ships shown in some of the gameplay being as tall as the Empire State Building, which is around 1,250 feet. But I wanted to take a look at the actual size of a bunch of the ships shown and less about how much feet or meters you can make these ships, because the entire world of Starfield isn't being built as a one-to-one size comparison to real life, and going into feet and meters and exactly how big some of these ships could be won't actually give a clear explanation to most people. And I think one of the best ways to do this is just to go look at all of the bigger ships we were shown in gameplay, because some of these are pretty massive, and I think it's going to give people a much more easier understanding of how big you could potentially make ships by looking at some that have already been made. And one of the first ones I wanted to look at, which is also one of the coolest ones in my opinion, is this big ship that seems to be a cargo hauler for Star Freight. And this was also shown in the most recent showcase, and we get to see this massive ship landed on a landing pad. This ship is pretty massive. It has 4 big cargo containers on each side, and these seem to be pretty massive themselves, but they also gave a pretty good size comparison comparing a human to the actual ship, because at the front of the ship there is a human standing on top of it, and this human basically looks like a little ant sitting on top of this ship. Even just these cargo containers are quite a bit taller than a human and are much bigger overall. And this ship does have multiple different weapon systems, so we also get to see a size comparison from a human to these different weapon systems. And there are 2 different weapons on the front that seem to be either some type of beam weapon or maybe a turreted weapon system, because these have a bunch of barrels on the front, so not exactly sure what type of weaponry these actually are, but just one of these weapons is quite a lot bigger than a singular human. I would say one of these weapons on the front are probably the size of like 10 humans, give or take. So just some of the weaponry you can have on ships, and we know you can have a lot of weaponry on ships, we already get to start to see a pretty good comparison on the actual size that these ships are actually going to be. So the ship is absolutely massive when compared directly to the size of a human, but we also get another screenshot to take a look at the back side of this ship, because in some of the footage they were putting together the ship in the ship builder, and we get to see them putting on one of the engines onto the ship, and the engines on this ship are incredibly massive themselves and have a mass of 334, and that's just one of these engines. Now, to give you a good comparison to one of the engines getting put on this massive ship, the Frontier, which is the starting ship you start out with in the game, which you've probably seen in a ton of footage, is only 359 mass for the whole ship. This one engine that's being put on this massive freight carrier is 334 mass itself. One of these engines weighs around the same as your starter ship. Now, I said earlier in the video that I didn't want to go super deep into the actual sizing of meters or feet with these different ships, but since we get to see one of the bigger ships in the shipbuilding section of the game where they actually have meters laid out in the grid, I think this is a decent point to give a comparison with the actual measured out size. And I think how the grid of the shipbuilding system is going to work is your ship starts in the center, and then the 4 markers that are going away from the ship all have their own measurement. So for instance, looking at the back of the ship, we can see 46 meters laid out on the ground. Now this would be 46 meters from the center of the ship. So assuming this ship is generally the same size from the center, it would be 46 meters times 2. So for simplicity's sake, let's say this ship is 100 meters long, which would be a bit over 300 feet long. And it's seeming like you're able to build ships much larger than this. Some of the theories I've seen is that you'll be able to go 100 meters in any direction, which would be 200 meters for, say, the full length of a ship. Now that's just theories, but it seems like going off of some of the measurements we get to see in the shipbuilding system, that seems to be a pretty plausible theory. And like I mentioned, Starfield isn't going to be a one-to-one to real life, but that size in the game is going to be incredibly large. Now, another one of the really big ships we get to take a look at is this ship out in space that was shown in one of the gameplay trailers. And what's really interesting about this ship, besides it looking absolutely massive, is that it has 3 other ships currently attached or docked with it. There are 2 smaller fighting looking ships that don't look to be docked as much as they look to be attached to it in more of a docking or storage area. So most likely these ships wouldn't be something that are temporarily docked to it. These are ships that would be attached to the ship, probably as fighters to help them if they get attacked. But then there's another larger ship temporarily docked to the side of it. Now this ship at the side looks to be a similar size to the Frontier, which is our starter ship, which as we went over is decent sized itself. And this main ship is much larger than the ship attached to it. And this does look to be at least the longest ship we've seen. This ship does seem to be a bit more compact than the other big ship we looked at, but this one does seem to be quite a bit longer. And we're getting more to the sizes to what could generally be considered a flagship. And also looking at this ship, you can see at the front of it, it seems to be a piece of weaponry that looks somewhat similar to the weaponry we looked at on the other big ship, and it looks very small on this ship. So this definitely seems to be one of the biggest ships we've been shown, and this isn't one that we get to see in the ship builder, but it has been mentioned that basically all of the ships in the game were also created using the shipbuilding system that the players get to use to build their own ships. So presumably you'll be able to either fully recreate every ship in the game, or you'll be able to come close to recreating every ship in the game. The developers may have some more custom ships that you're not able to fully recreate their size, but if that was the case, you would probably still be able to come close. And the last ship I wanted to look at is the mech ship the developers showed off, and this is much taller than any other ship they've shown. And one of the main reasons I want to look at this is because this shows you can make your ships much larger vertically than basically any ships they've been showing off, besides this one. So we'll be able to not only make ships very long horizontally, but we'll also be able to make them very tall. Now, a lot of the height on these mechs comes from these different building blocks they're using to make it much taller, and these seem to be right around the same size as the cargo containers that we looked at on the first ship. And those 4 cargo containers on the first ship, I would say spanned the length of 50 to 60% of the total length of the ship. Now, these seeming to be of a similar size, it seems like this mech ship is going to be around as tall as that first ship we looked at is in length. And as we went over, I theorized that that first ship would be a little under 100 meters. So if all of this is correct, this mech is probably around 100 meters tall. It may actually even be a little bit taller than that. So going off of this, if you want to make the biggest ship you could, you want to make the biggest flagship or carrier you possibly could, you're probably going to want to make a ship that is not only very long and make it as long as you can, but you're also going to want to make it as wide as you can and then as tall as you can. And I think if you were just looking for size, we're going to be able to make ships much larger than any ship they've actually shown us. Now, as we've gone over in previous videos, building ships like this is going to be much more of an endgame focus feature. Todd Howard specifically mentioned that getting to these bigger ships, fully customizing these ships, getting all the best parts is going to be ridiculously expensive. So it's safe to say you're going to be able to build some absolutely massive ships in Starfield. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.